Welcome back to another episode of Odd Hour. There is a lesser-known case of ghostly activity in a small English town. One that made headlines in 2021 when a picture was taken of the unknown entity at the heart of the tale. The history surrounding the local area is well documented, with newspapers reporting of the following events, even interviewing the family who underwent these mysterious circumstances. With how documented this case is, it is surprising that this fascinating case is not often on the list of more well-known hauntings. Nearly a decade before Enfield and Amityville, there was a sinister haunting in the town of Pontefract, where local legends tell of a monk who may have never left the town's monastery, who stands as a simple figure donned in a black cloak, who lurks just out of the periphery of your eye. This is the story of the haunting of 30 East Drive and the Black Monk of Pontefract. The name Pontefract is derived from Latin, translating to broken bridge. It was first recorded as Pontefracto in 1090 in a book called the Domesday Survey. The town existed for several years prior before being recorded in the book, having been fully formed at the end of the 11th century. Pontefract now is a middling market town located in West Yorkshire, England, known historically for its surrounding castles and priories, and its market days being Wednesday and Saturday and closed Thursday afternoons. Its history is very rich, especially during the Norman Conquest. Pontefract Castle became a defining location during the conflict. Initially built in 1070, then rebuilt with stone, the castle is believed to be the site of King Richard II's death, though it is not known if he died of natural causes like disease or if he was murdered. Theories abound. The popular culture uses Shakespeare's perspective, though the facts may have been twisted to suit the needs of the play. The Pontefract haunting is often a smaller piece of the town's history, despite being among the many magnificent stories collected on the plot of land. This story takes place nearly 900 years after the Norman conquests of England. The haunting took place during the summer of 1966, on an estate within Pontefract known as Chequerfield. The house, number 30 East Drive, was then owned by the Pritchard family, made up of 4 individuals. Joe and Jean Pritchard stood as the patriarch and matriarch respectively, with 2 children, then 12-year-old Diane and 15-year-old Philip. During the week of the August bank holiday, which in 1966 would have been from August 28th to September 3rd, Joe, Jean, and Diane decided to take a vacation. Philip decided to stay home from the holiday, and was looked after by his grandmother, Jean's mother, Sarah Scholes. Thursday, September 1st, started as a peaceful day. Newspapers described the day as being sunny, so nice in fact that Philip spent most of the day out in the garden reading. Even with the nice weather outside, Sarah had been complaining about the temperature inside the house, stating that it was unusually chilly. As the day began to wind down and Philip returned to the house, he found his grandmother knitting amidst a bizarre environment. She was, quote, surrounded by a gray-white powder falling, like chalk dust, through the air. Despite the unusual situation, Sarah is said to have looked up at her grandson and asked, "What have you been up to?" as if she were completely oblivious to the white powder around her. Upon looking up at the ceiling, they found nothing that could have caused the white substance to fall. And in fact, the closer the two looked for the source, it was discovered that, quote, the top half of the room was perfectly clear. The falling powder started on a level below Philip's head. Neither were particularly scared. It simply appeared as though dust had become unsettled due to the rising wind outside, a wind that had supposedly blown the back door closed earlier in the day. However, the powder continued to form within the living room, and so Sarah crossed the street to where her other child, Marie Kelly, lived. It was stated by Marie that her mother entered the threshold, quote, looking like a snowman. Philip remained at the house much as he had the rest of the day, and began to clean up a cup of tea that he had made for his grandmother, though it was now tainted by the suspicious powder and dust that was gradually settling in throughout the house. Marie and Sarah eventually returned, and Marie began to help clean the house when she turned to the kitchen. With the teacup placed in the sink, Philip began to make another when Marie spotted something on the floor, a puddle. Thinking nothing of it, she began to clean it with a tea towel when she saw another patch of water. Running the towel over the second patch, she spotted yet another. It was a relentless situation, one puddle after another. Marie, thinking that perhaps a pipe had burst and was causing water to leak and pool under the linoleum tile of the kitchen, stooped down and grabbed a corner to pull back and check. According to Colin Wilson, author of the book Poltergeist, a classic study in destructive hauntings, Marie found that the floor underneath was completely dry of any water whatsoever. Meanwhile, in yet another curious case, as Philip began making a second cup of tea, the tea dispenser, as though having a mind of its own, began raining tea and sugar across the counter all by itself. After multiple occurrences of weirdness, Sarah exclaimed, "Stop it," to which Philip is quoted in a local newspaper as replying indignantly, "I can't, it's doing it on its own." Marie Kelly, in the meantime, had called on the local water board, who promised to send a handyman to take a look at the house. Once he arrived, he too found, as Marie had, that the floor underneath the linoleum was dry. After examining the drains and pipes in the house and finding no damage that could cause pools of water, the water board man gave the explanation that perhaps condensation had caused the water to form, but the Pritchards and Kelly were not fully satisfied with the answer. The tea dispenser once more caused a mess in the kitchen, to add further to the bizarre antics within the house that August night. Philip and Sarah could see the button being pressed in and out, incredulously. The kitchen remained the epicenter for the activity that evening, and as the two watched and listened, the dishes, crockery, and cups in the cabinet began to vibrate, gradually increasing to a loud rattle before a pot was thrown up the stairs by an unseen force. This was the first in the violence this poltergeist would exhibit in its haunting of the property, and would not be the last time the stairs would be the center of such behavior. However, the night was still young for Philip and his grandmother, whose experiences would only increase as the hours went on. Haunted by several banging noises upstairs after the second tea dispensing, Philip and Sarah were tired and decided to turn in for the night. As Sarah began to say goodnight to her grandson, quote, "The wardrobe in the corner of the room was tottering and swaying like a drunken man." This was the final straw for the two scared individuals, and Sarah began to pack up, calling to her grandson, quote, "Philip, get dressed, quick, we're going." They spent the evening across the street with Marie Kelly and her husband Vic. And back at 30 East Drive, the poltergeist, as of yet unnamed, left one last parting gift before disappearing, seemingly forever. It slashed a wedding photo of Joe and Jean, cut from end to end. The haunting left a bitter taste in the Pritchards and their surrounding neighbors' mouths. The house went quiet for 2 years. Philip, now 17, worked in his father's shop, and Diane was 14 years old. The haunting from years prior, not completely forgotten, rested in the back of the family's minds. But as the 1968 August bank holiday rolled around once more, Grandmother Sarah began to bring the subject back to the forefront of everyone's minds. Jean and Sarah were sat at the kitchen table having a drink when Sarah asked if her daughter had heard any noises throughout the house, to which the younger woman said no. Jean dismissed Sarah's concerns about the haunting. After all of those bumps in the night had occurred over 2 years ago with no sign of returning. And those supposed bumps in the night were not directed at any member of the family in particular. If anything, it seemed as though if there had been an entity, it played a few pranks before moving on to its next haunt. But that night, the haunting began in earnest. As the family settled into bed one evening, Jane walked to the landing after hearing a bizarre noise. As the whole of the hallway was pitch black, she fumbled for the light switch when she felt something fly past her head. As light finally flooded the landing, she saw the culprit. A paintbrush had been thrown at her, and then a paste bucket, which was chucked at her, barely missing the woman as it crashed against the wall behind her. Objects began flying at her, including a carpet sweeper that appeared to be held by an invisible hand and used as a club. Rolls of wallpaper swooped past her head, and she screeched out in fear, calling the rest of her family to attention. According to a newspaper reporting on the incident, quote, "As Mr. Pritchard came from the bedroom, paintbrushes began to fly about. One missed Diane's head by a fraction, another hit her on the shoulder. Her father shouted, 'Don't stand there,' and Diane cried in astonishment, 'It doesn't hurt,' but the brush had been traveling fast enough to knock her down," unquote. Diane would quickly become the target of the poltergeist, at first dubbed Mr. Nobody, before being somewhat affectionately referred to as Fred. One instance saw a sewing machine being hurled at the teenager, pinning her to a wall, though she was very luckily unharmed. As the haunting became more frightening, many of the local townspeople began to speculate as to where this mysterious figure had come from, and why it was targeting specifically the Pritchards and Diane in particular. Many of these speculations revolved around the land that the town now stood on, and nearby landmarks, such as Pontefract Castle and the old Castleford Gallows. It is believed that at the gallows, an accused witch named Mary Pannell was executed near the site in the 1500s. Quote, "After the death penalty was issued, Mary, now in her 70s, was taken to the hill near Ledston Hall and burnt at the stake, and became the last reported witch to be burnt to death in England." While the figure haunting the Pritchards was never ID'd as either a woman or a witch, many held up this execution as one of the reasons for the overall melancholic and despairing feelings in and around the Pontefract estates. Other speculations arose later as the experiences towards Diane increased in severity. On one evening, several years into the haunting, Diane was walking downstairs when she was grabbed by an unseen force at the shirt and neck. Kicking and screaming in terror, she was dragged violently upstairs. In a newspaper report following the incident, Jean stated that while making coffee, she heard Diane begin to scream. Quote, "She and Philip rushed out to see Diane being dragged up the stairs. It was just light enough to see her cardigan stretched out in front of her, as if Fred was tugging at it. His other hand was apparently at her throat." Here then came more gossip around the Pontefract region. Why was Diane such a large target? According to local legend dated in the 1540s, there was once a young girl who resided in the same area as the present-day Pritchards. She would have been around the same age as Diane, between 12 and 16. A nearby priory hosted many Cluniac monks, which were originally a medieval association that emerged in Cluny, France, that spread to the far reaches of Europe. One such monk took a liking to the young girl, who was later found raped and murdered. It was hypothesized that Diane was a conduit for this young girl, and the monk, who was later hung from the Castleford Gallows, located across the street from the Chequerfield estate, saw Diane as this other girl. However, a study into poltergeist activity across the world and in the Pontefract region found that there was, quote, "no evidence whatsoever that a monk of Pontefract was ever hanged for rape." Pontefract is a small town, and there are a few local histories. The author's search revealed that the local monks were involved in a great deal of litigation and a certain amount of violence. Their virtues were warlike rather than contemplative, but there was undoubtedly no rape and murder, unquote. There arises one more question. Why was a monk ever pulled into the story? Philip and Diane were watching television one evening, resting in the lounge room. Between the dining room and the kitchen was a door that separated the space, its view through somewhat obscured by a frosted glass. Absent-mindedly, Philip began gazing around the room, his eyes stopping on the door to the dining room. It took a moment for Diane, too, to follow his stare, and the two watched as a figure moved from one side of the glass to the other. According to author Colin Wilson, quote, "It might of course have been someone who had walked in. Philip opened the door and saw the tall black shape of the monk vanishing. He says that it seemed to disappear into the kitchen floor." From this moment onward, the poltergeist became known as the Black Monk of Pontefract. Local historians searched archives trying to understand where this monk could have come from. A newspaper published in the early 1980s stated that, quote, "Pontefract is a hotbed for hauntings. Several monks have been seen in the priory." Another article from a decade later found that, quote, "The ghost of Pontefract Castle has been seen again, clothed in black and crouching by the castle keep, reading a scroll." While no one monk could be definitively assigned to the Pritchards' hauntings, the monk moniker stuck to the appearance of the figure, as it was almost always clothed in a black frock. Nearly 10 years after the original hauntings had ceased, and the Pritchards had moved from 30 East Drive, the house remains a hotspot for amateur and professional ghost hunters alike. A website documenting past and current hauntings lists over 200 occurrences of hauntings in the house, many from overnight stays. Another site boasts that many who try to remain overnight tend to leave the house prematurely, as the poltergeist becomes too much for the average visitor. In fact, the current owners, quote, "do not recommend staying the night and will even try to discourage you from doing." In my opinion, this statement is being used as a sort of reverse psychology, and as a way to increase interest in the house. Most recently, the Black Monk showed up back in the news due to 2 different incidents within the house, both involving a photograph that many claim is among the first visual evidence of the monk. Occurring in June and September of 2016, the blurry photos shocked many who read the news reports. A photo taken in June of 2016 purports to show the face of the supposed Black Monk. Investigators Peter Bolton and Rob Hughes, lead investigators of the Ghost Inspectors Paranormal Group, took a photo facing an upstairs mirror. Despite the investigators not being in frame, there is a face staring back at the camera from within the mirror. The hallway photo, quote, shows a mirror with what appears to be a face staring out of it, with either black hair around it or a black hooded robe, though there was no one near them at the time. Bolton's photo was taken near a spot where the Black Monk would often antagonize the Pritchards, and is also near the spot where Diane had been dragged upstairs. Bolton does acknowledge that pareidolia may be having an effect on the photo, though he claims that he, quote, asked other people what they could see, but I didn't tell them what I had seen. Most saw what I did. With pareidolia, many usually see different things. That's why you can dismiss stuff usually. But not this one, as everyone saw the same thing, unquote. The article does not state who he asked, and it could have been his other investigators, whose brains would already be looking for a monk in their evidence, as that is the sole reason they were exploring the Pontefract house. Several months later, in September 2016, a separate paranormal group led by Claire Cowell took a photo near one of the bedrooms. Having been in the house several times prior, Cowell calls this evidence, quote, the most definitive proof she and fellow ghost hunters have ever seen that the Black Monk still haunts the building. The images show a floral or fleur-de-lis patterned carpet, the perspective seemingly from the threshold of the room. Along the back wall is a chair or chaise, to the right a radiator, or a hanging coat rack is situated above. The colors are dark. The picture must have been taken at night with the flash on. On the left side of the image, it appears that there is a wall, after which the room continues on for several more feet. What can be seen is an arm, from just below where the shoulder would be. The hand then appears to be clutching some sort of object, though there is a motion blur to it. The arm itself is draped in a black cloth, and many assert that it is clutching a rosary. Cowell, describing the photo, states, quote, the arm you can see in the photo is not a solid form. It looks like mist and is very strange, but you can see the sleeve of a robe hanging down. Even more haunting, the article states that the photo was taken at the bottom of the same stairs Diane Pritchard was dragged up decades previous. While the photos are somewhat hard to debunk without talking directly to the investigators and going to the house myself, the images are rather chilling. Especially with a long history of bizarre activity at 30 East Drive, it is hard to not take the images at face value. However, both were supposedly taken right at the spot where Diane was dragged upstairs, one of the most well-known and most frequently reported incidents of the Pritchards. Further, the location is not unique. If the house is like many others, there is likely only one set of stairs. I believe the investigators may be giving the stairs more importance in the story, as though the monk is specifically targeting them as its prime location to haunt, when it is more likely that it is a central location in the house, and one that is highly frequented. The importance of the location of the photos seems somewhat overstated. And again, while Bolton did not state that he thought he saw the Black Monk, he and his investigators had gone to the house with the sole purpose of investigating those hauntings. So even without him stating what he thought he saw, it would already be at the forefront of his mind. While it is highly likely that the photo may be hoaxes, or at the very least misinterpreted, the history of the house remains. 30 East Drive, under the ownership of a film producer who based his film When the Lights Went Out on the hauntings, continues to be a spot that many locals and visitors alike have had a vast amount of experiences in. Booked nearly a year out for investigation, the house itself remains in the same condition as that first night in August 1966, when the monk began its antics. While it may never be certain who or what the Black Monk is, and why it targeted the Pritchards, the overabundance of happenings and continued speculation keep the legend alive and thriving in the little town of Pontefract. thank you for joining yet again for this episode of Odd Hour. If you are a returning listener, I thank you so much for wanting to listen to me tell you another story and waiting for far too long for new content, and I'm very sorry about that. And if you are new, I thank you as well and hope you enjoy. All references will be included in the description of this podcast. I highly recommend taking a look at the photos of the supposed Black Monk. Even if fake, they are very intriguing. They give the same feeling as the one of the ghost boy from Amityville, if that makes you want to look at that a little bit more. You can also find an episode transcript in the description as well. I now have an official Instagram and email for the show, so if you know of any stories you would want to hear an episode for, you can email me now at oddhourpodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow me at Odd Hour Podcast on Instagram. I'm Isaiah. Stay weird and join me soon for more mysteries, weird stories, and all things little known.